Well, greetings, everybody. And thank you for tuning into the channel. And of course, I've got Ben Habib with me today. I'm very, very happy to say. And I know a lot of you have been nagging me to get Ben on the program. And of course, he's a busy fellow, but I've succeeded now. And I've got some questions for him. They are designed really to bring out Ben's thoughts on domestic policy in the main. I don't want to go down rabbit holes of overseas policy at this stage because I think we've got enough trouble at home without worrying about trouble abroad. So I'm going to go through the questions. We may not have time to finish them all, but Ben's very kindly agreed to come back another day if we can't clear the decks on them. And I'm very much interested in what he's got to say, as I know you are, because I've had enough comments from you already on this. So anyway, greetings, Ben, greetings to you.
Greetings to you, Godfrey, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm flattered to be asked and delighted to be on with you. I'm very well aware of the huge contribution you've made to the debate on our side. And, you've been swinging the bat a hell of a lot longer than I have. So it is flattering to be asked. And as I say, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Kind words indeed. Thank you, Ben. Now, the question number one for you. I don't normally, everybody knows, read questions out. That's not my way. But I do think we need to cover ground today with Ben to get the most out of it. So they're not in ordinary merit. When I wrote them out, I thought they were, but they're not as I look at them now, but never mind. They all need answering in some way. Now, the first one is, Ben, is Liz Truss claimed recently economic reform is impossible without a massive defabianization, if that's a real word, of the civil service, particularly the Home Office and judiciary. How would you go about that, if indeed you agree?
Yeah, I do agree with her. I think it's more than that. I think our constitutional framework needs also a massive overhaul, effectively the repealing of lots of laws that have been put in place ever since Tony Blair came to power. I think our entire constitutional architecture, from the laws that effectively create our constitution, because we don't have a written constitution, the laws and the protocols that define our constitution, all the way through to the architecture of the civil service, House of Lords, the quality of MPs, the way we recruit MPs, or the main parties recruit MPs anyway, all of it needs phenomenal restoration, I think is a better word than reform. I think we've had far too much reform and not enough restoration. We had a system that worked. Tony Blair came along and he almost under a blanket, hidden away, revolutionized our entire makeup, and we need to go back to sort of pre-Tony Blair era. So I completely agree with Liz, but I think we have to go a lot further than just the civil service.
I understand that point. What would be the doing thing, as we used to say at the Asheridge Management course? What's the doing thing? How would we start that process, which obviously has to be done? We cannot continue, particularly with the judiciary, which has been so overtly politicized. And I was born in 1949, and I look upon this with absolute horror because my professional exams all covered the general principles of English law and our unwritten constitution. And I find this jaw-droppingly amazing that we've got ourselves into this kind of pickle, which you quite rightly say started with Tony Blair's system of recruiting politically sympathetic judges, so on and so forth. So how would you go about that? Would you get hold of all the CVs and say, sorry, mate, you're out.
I think you've got to do a lot of that. Absolutely. But I think before you get there, this is how I think it needs to be tackled. We've got to get our legislative architecture straight first. So, for example, Tony Blair created the Supreme Court, and I think that's wrong. What was so elegant and worked so well in the United Kingdom was that Parliament was not just the supreme law-making body, it was also the supreme adjudicating body, with the law lords sitting in the House of Lords. And it brought together, there wasn't a separation of power, it brought together power but the power was being exercised actually without fear, without favor, by people who sat in the House of Lords, devoid of the political activism that's created when you separate powers. And I think the creation of the Supreme Court, particularly given we don't have a written constitution which would then guide the Supreme Court, has been a terrible invention. And I have spoken to lawyers about how we undo it. Some are not in favor of abolishing the Supreme Court, but I would actually start by my own inclination would be, in the absence of any better arrangement, would be to abolish the Supreme Court and put it back into the House of Lords. The other thing that Starmer wishes to do right now is to take the bishops out of the House of Lords. You might be aware of that, Godfrey. He wants to take the bishops out. And I think he wants to do that because constitutionally we are a Christian country. And once he takes the bishops out, he's one step further towards saying, well, we're not a Christian country. Tony Blair took the law lords out and he created the separation of powers and therefore created the ability for judges to become activists. And so I think you first deal with the architecture and then you identify those who are not worthy of the position that they hold because of what they've been doing in the past. And you do precisely what you just said, which is you sack them. And this, as a prerequisite for that, you need people in government who are ministers, who've held positions in real life, knowing how to manage people and having the wherewithal to make those difficult decisions and fill the gaps that they would create when they sack people left, right, and center, because voids will be created, and have the confidence to do it. I think one of the problems we've got, people say the civil service is running amok. Well, it's running amok in part because they can run circles around the ministers. And the ministers, you look at the front bench of the Labour Party and indeed the previous Conservative government, and with very few exceptions, they haven't had any real life experience. So you need people who've been on the outside, who've had to make difficult decisions, who've had to sack people, who've had to create voids in their own organizations in order to improve. They had to create the void first. And you need those kinds of people in government. So, I think one of the challenges for Advance UK, this new party that I've set up, is to get candidates, and I'm already on it. We're 4 years away from a general election, but a critical component of Advance UK success and the ability to save this country is get candidates for parliamentarians who are genuinely able to give effect to the change once you've changed the legislative architecture. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, actually. It's interesting. You've given me quite a slightly different dimension on what I thought. And that's good because that makes sense. I knew this would happen. We get bound to go down a rabbit hole at every question. So blown off course on question one. But in order to do that, I've always felt, in point of fact, I agree with you entirely. One of the problems that we have, and I can only talk about the Conservative Party because I don't know about the Labour Party's machinations. I don't quite understand that at the moment, and historically not quite the same. But one, I thought the Conservative Party started drifting away from its conservative with a small c roots when you could parachute people into constituencies from the outside. And I speak as one who has personal experience of this, friends who were in the Conservative Party in the East Riding of Yorkshire, where I'm speaking from at the moment. Would it not be good to have a system, to start that system rolling, to say, if you want to be a party parliamentary candidate, you must have lived in the constituency properly, not fake, properly for at least 5 years. And the local parliamentary party, constituency party, must make the selections. You cannot have Smith Square making selections about who is going to be the candidate for East Yorkshire or North Yorkshire or anywhere else. So it gets back to the roots. So the activists in the constituency select and we're getting some really really low grade people if they're selected by Smith Square. And of course that goes double probably for the Labour Party, although I'm not quite sure how they do it. I mean, wouldn't that be a relatively easy step to take, not allowing parliamentary Labour or parliamentary parties to centralise the selection, and that would send it back to the roots.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. One of the impacts of centralizing it is that you're bound, if the center is making all the decisions in recruitment of candidates, you're bound to um, choose candidates, or this is what's happened anyway. They choose candidates that they can control because they want the center to have the power. And so over a period of years and decades, the average quality of a parliamentarian has become just a supplicant for the party. He'll do whatever he's told. He or she will do whatever they're told. And you do see this. I'm sure you're aware of it, even though you don't follow the Labour Party, nor do I. But you'll see that many of the Labour MPs are wet behind the ears. They've just left university. At most, if they've left university and had some time outside uni, they've worked in charities, or they've worked in the Labour Party, or they've done some kind of social work, but they haven't actually engaged with the world. And so the lady who I was up against, Jen Kitchener, something like that, I was up against in Wellingborough during the general election. I mean, she was about 27 years old, 28 years old, knew absolutely nothing. She beat me because she was in the Labour Party. She's a perfect MP for the Labour Party because she will always toe the line. She won't exercise any independent thought. And there's this desire, I think, in the party system to impose the party's values and agenda on the individual. And therefore, the individual becomes more attractive the less independent they are of mind. And what we need is great thinkers at the moment. The country's in real trouble. We need great thinkers who are prepared to go outside the box and challenge within their party the direction of travel that the party's going in, and so on. There's another component here, I think, Geoffrey, and that's that the main parties, the two-party system, Labour and Conservative, used to, between them, have millions of members in the country in the 1950s and 60s. And over the decades, the number of members has diminished dramatically. So I think the Conservative Party had 2.8 million members at its peak in the late 1950s. And it now has 120,000 members. And so it's also, you talked about the connection with the constituency. It's lost touch with the country. It's incapable of staying in touch with the country because it hasn't got the membership. If it had 2.8 million members, it would be, first of all, it would have a much closer understanding of what the people that vote Conservative want the Conservative Party to do. And it would also have a much bigger pool of people from which to draw. And the hollowing out of parties and their membership, I think, is also a function of it. And so I just come back to I think ideally, of course, we want MPs from local constituencies who understand the local issues. I do think at this juncture in the United Kingdom's travel, if you like, the threats to us at a national level, I don't know if you agree with this, Godfrey, but I see the threats at the national level more severe than at any time since World War II. I think we are being challenged. Our very existence as a country is in the balance. And so we need some real Herculean champions at a national level who can deliver the policies required to save the United Kingdom. And that will then feed down, obviously, into local constituencies. But the privilege of being more concerned about what's happening in your locality, as important as it is, and we mustn't lose connection with it, I think that privilege at the moment is being challenged by much bigger national issues. And my mind is really on the, I was, as I mentioned, I stood in Wellingborough. And in Wellingborough, you can see lots of local issues that manifest themselves, but they all have their roots now in national level policies that are so damaging the United Kingdom. So we do need champions to come forward and save the country, and constituencies come, behind that, if that makes sense.
Yes, I wasn't suggesting parochialism. I was just suggesting that when the demise of the Conservative Party brought along totally on themselves, of course, was the result of the Conservative parties locally not being able to select their own man or woman. And I would certainly think that they would, if these candidates were known to them, they would be of a higher standard and more capable of taking a very much broader view than their own backyard. And that's the one thing that we drifted away from when it's centralized. We had people who would, as you quite rightly say, just do as they're told. They're just noddy dogs. And that was never really the concept of the original concept of a parliamentary democracy. Okay, you may belong to a political party, but the reason you lost was simply because somebody had a great big red rosette. Which is something else I would like to look at, because I don't believe that that's any way to run anything, that you vote red or blue. It ought to be a much more a hustings idea that, I'm Ben Habib, this is what I believe in on the national issues, or the main issues of the day. And here's, here's this woman, whatever she is, and she can say what she is. And in which case, of course, none of the Labour backbenchers would have got in on that basis. They got in because they had a red rosette. And had you stuck a red rosette, a dog turd, they would have voted for the dog turd. Similarly, in a blue, in a blue constituency, certainly where I live, I mean, I can tell you that I live in a rural constituency, where they think if they don't vote Conservative and they put their ballot paper for anybody else in on election day, their hand will simply drop off within 24 hours. As I think it was, I have to say, I don't often quote Nigel Farage, but he did get this one right, although he's a bit dodgy in other matters, but he certainly said, never underestimate the stupidity of the rural Conservative. And I think that's a fair comment. But certainly, I think that these things certainly need to be, I totally agree with you, it's a question of how we get there. And I think this business of voting red or blue, which of course the Americans have the same problem, don't they? You vote red or blue.
I mean, there's a very good argument, I think, to be made for the abolition of political parties, and that everyone who stands for parliament must stand on their own 2 feet and run their own campaigns. And then when you get into parliament, an individual somehow needs to curry favor with a significant number of MPs, and out of that body of people create a government. It'll be quite challenging because we're so used to the party system. But if you required every individual, effectively, if you banned parties and every individual had to do it on their own, you would, by definition, by the simple act of doing that, you would get higher caliber people doing it, because they wouldn't be able to, most people, the lower caliber, if you don't mind me calling them that, wouldn't be able to operate outside the party system. They're only there, as you say, because of the patronage of the party.
I have been advocating exactly that for many years. Yes, indeed. So I'm glad that you've endorsed that with your come to that own view yourself, because yes, I think that's the obvious way through. And then they can make their friends when they are elected, and they must be given time to do that. X weeks to do that. They can say, well, who believes in this and who believes in that, whether it's foreign policy. And you might take one view on foreign policy that you don't take on something else. And so you'll have a very much more representative and a much higher standard. But I'll go on to another question. And I'm dodging around here because I think...
But can I just say, just quickly before we finish on that, Advance UK utterly recognises knowing what the country needs to be saved is actually pretty straightforward. I think we all know what the country needs in order to remove the existential threats which it faces. But the critical and demanding step that I think presents itself is the choosing of candidates. That's vital. And I don't think parties put enough effort into it. And so Advance UK is starting that effort. And what I've said to the team that we're putting together to identify candidates is that I don't want to fish in the same old pool. I don't want to go and get failed Tories or failed Tories is about, the most obvious place to go to get people out of the same pool. But, some parties are even going to fail Labour members and fail Lib Dems. But I don't want to fish in the same pool. If you fish in the same pool, you're bound to get the same infection that those fish have got. And they're the fish that delivered this country into the peril in which we now find ourselves. So we need to find people from outside politics, people who are new to politics, people who come from the real world, as I say, are perfectly capable of handling the management of the civil service and so on, have an understanding of the constitution such as it is in the United Kingdom and what needs to be done. And that's the kind of person I really want in Advance UK. People who are, they understand the country's problems, they're committed to it, they're capable, they're great thinkers, they're doers, and they can speak well, so they can articulate their case.
I totally agree. I know that a lot of people have been horrified at people at parties who have been bringing out, the old guard that failed in order to simply, quite obviously, to save their seats, which is so. I mean, everybody gets that. People aren't as stupid as people might think. It brings me on to another question. I'm scrolling through because I want to get some rationality of them. That brings me on. It brings me on, Ben, to a free press and public sector broadcasting. One of the shields for ordinary people, citizens of the country, has been a free press, an investigative free press. And we have now long since drifted away from that. There were certain newspapers, of course, the Mirror and the Labour Party, the Daily Herald, as it used to be years ago, and the Labour Party, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail with the Tory Party. But now we have issues of such importance that, for example, and I said I wasn't going to go into foreign policy, and I'm only using this as an example, not as flagging up a debate on this particular subject. But we have not had the truth, for example, in the Ukraine, Russian Federation conflict. We haven't had the truth there at all from the Daily Telegraph since the whole thing began. And if you will remember the days of Claire Hollingworth and John Keegan as defence correspondents in the Daily Telegraph, who were really expert in their field, and you could read a Daily Telegraph on these matters with complete confidence. Now you simply can't. And public sector broadcasting, all you get is CIA. And this has been true, it doesn't matter where it's Syria, the Middle East, it doesn't matter where it is. You're getting CIA stroke MI6 stroke Mossad press releases. And they say, obviously, press releases for anybody who knows anything about these matters. And I'm trained in geopolitical, military history and strategy. That's
so you see right through it.
So I can see straight through it, but sadly, an awful lot of people can't. We're still being told, immense, huge lies about some of these global conflicts, and that worries me. So it brings me down to a question. I mean, how would you handle public sector broadcasting if you indeed endorse any form of public sector broadcasting?
So I think the BBC, if I can start with the BBC, that is the public sector broadcaster. The BBC, I think, played a very, very valuable role in the years gone past. I remember as a child, perhaps I was naive as a child. I'm still naive, by the way, but perhaps I was even more naive as a child. But I believed everything that the BBC said. It was one of 2 or 3 channels when I was a child. And I had the impression that, I think correctly, that it gave you facts about what was going on in the world. Certainly the BBC World Service was phenomenal, I thought. Even as a young man. And now when I watch the BBC, I feel I'm just getting indoctrination. I'm receiving the government's view of how the country should be run, the sort of climate change, net zero, interventionist government, big spending. Levelling up is always seen through a prism of spending money rather than creating opportunities. The cutting of taxes is never possible because they're always unfunded, but yet they manage to find more money down the sofa to spend money whenever they want to, which is the same thing, but the other way around. And it's ideologically based. And you see that coming through the BBC. You see it in Sky too, to a lesser extent, but you see it coming through the BBC in spades. And so I think in the absence of being able to fix that, and it seems to be an intractable problem, and I don't believe in creating a regulator, because then you're only as good as the regulator is. And the regulator, as we know, Ofcom is ideologically hijacked as well. So I think the BBC has had its day. And if it's to function, to find a way to function in the real world, then I think it should have its license fee removed, and it should be sent on its way, perhaps in a transitionary mechanism, so that doesn't go bust overnight. But it should learn to live in the real world, because it has ceased to act as an independent objective purveyor of facts. It's highly politicized, the BBC, as I see it.
Yes, I agree entirely. It's an anachronism, really, isn't it? Let's be brutally
It
frank.
is, yeah. It's
And
from a
all
different era.
politicians, mainstream politicians, are huge supporters because it seems to me, to a certain extent, on the big issues of the day, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And certainly, this is true of energy policy. I mean, there's not been any serious pushback against suicidal energy policy, and it's very easy to
Yeah,
forget where it all started. Net zero didn't start with the idiot that we have in number 10. It didn't start with Miliband. It was here well before they even came into power. And it
yeah,
seems to me that we're not even getting any form of debate. And there was I won't mention the name because it isn't right for me to do so. She's a friend of mine now, who was a main performer on Breakfast Today for the BBC. And she left the BBC. She's a very well-known figure, and everybody would know if I mentioned her, which I don't intend to do. She, a very lovely lady, and we chatted the other day over lunch last year, I think it was, and she said, I had to leave the BBC because I'm fundamentally a journalist. You know, I'm a journalist, and I see
yeah. Well,
myself
that's
as a
interesting, isn't
journalist.
it? Yeah.
Well, she said I couldn't interview at the beginning of the COVID problem. Um, she said uh, the all BBC, Channel 4, and Sky were all brought together in the same room and told there would be no dissent on vaccination.
Yeah,
There would be no dissent. And she said, I couldn't live with that. I was told I could not interview anybody, and some very eminent virologists and immunologists globally who was saying this is not a good idea. Now, make up your own mind, but I couldn't interview them, so people were only getting one view. She said, I couldn't live with that. That's a
yeah.
complete
And I
betrayal. And she
think
was very highly paid.
Ofcom were given given powers to sanction any comment by any of the broadcasters that was anti-lockdown or anti-vaccine. They had the ability to intervene and sanction, and that is the shutting down of free speech by a so-called regulator. The regulator becomes then another vehicle for the government to influence the agenda. And so I think Ofcom needs to go. It was something that David Cameron said he would do. Do you remember? He said he would get rid of Ofcom, but actually he gave Ofcom greater powers. He increased the remit of Ofcom. And this is part of the problem with the Conservative Party. What they've done is conserve all the damaging policies that Labour before them did. The Conservative Party completely forgot that actually, in order to be Conservative, you must undo everything Labour did before you got into office. Cameron made the disastrous decision to just conserve what he inherited. He was the heir to Blair, and he didn't want to change that. And it was critical in 2010. Perhaps he couldn't do it with Nick Clegg as a partner, but it was critical, certainly by 2015, to reverse it, to go back to where we were so that the Conservative agenda could be established again. Small c Conservative agenda could be established in the UK.
An interesting enigma, Cameron, who, of course, I always get the impression that his life's ambition was to be in number 10 Downing Street, to be there, not to do anything. He didn't seem to want to do anything. He just wanted to be there.
Like Boris Johnson. I think Boris Johnson's the same.
Johnson's the same.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they stand four square for nothing really in particular.
Yeah.
So, and that's, you might argue that's been the same since the 80s. I don't know.
Don't know. I mean, I would hope that if you go into public service, particularly if you're well-heeled, like both Cameron and Johnson are, they're well-heeled people from privileged backgrounds. They should only go into public service if they really wish to serve. You know, why do it? Is it like an old boys club? They just want to have the tie. You know, they've made the step, and now they've done whatever they need. It seems a vacuous existence if that was their motive.
It's another rabbit hole, but it's an interesting rabbit hole. There needs to be some, I would get the impression that you need to be a form of sociopath to be a successful politician if you judge success by climbing up the greasy pole. Give you an example of that. I'd be interested in your view. In April 2002, there was pretty much a signed but unratified agreement to stop the war in April 2002, which Boris Johnson flew to Kiev to stop. Now, I would guess that is certainly probably
2022.
young men dead. A million young men dead since that time.
Since 2022.
22, yeah. What did I say?
You said 2002, but 2022,
yeah. Sorry, 2022. Old man. 2022, yes, April 2022. Now, I would suggest to you, and I'm interested in your view, that if I had torn up a peace agreement and there were a million young men dead 3 years on, I wouldn't sleep well at night. But I suspect Boris Johnson sleeps very well at night.
Yeah, so there's something very peculiar about Johnson's relationship with the Ukrainian war, because as we all know, Boris Johnson hasn't really got a political compass. He pivots from one issue to another, a bit like someone else we both know, and he'll do whatever is required to curry favor. But he's been absolute steadfast supporter of the war against Russia. And I wonder, and I know he spent a lot of time in the States making speeches to various congregations that the war in Ukraine must not be overlooked, that the American support for Ukraine should be forthcoming, etc. And I just wonder whether he's in bed with the arms manufacturers, whether there's some kind of unhealthy relationship. There's a lot of money that goes with war, isn't there, Godfrey?
Well, it's $1 trillion a year. And the industrial military complex, of course, dominates the Senate, and it dominates Congress. It would be very difficult to believe somebody who is highly motivated by money, as Boris Johnson seems to be, as indeed are other politicians, some with a little more sophistication than others, but money seems to be an
others with less sophistication.
Yes. So I would argue that I think it's almost a given. I mean, I only go to sort of local pubs up here in Yorkshire, but I think everybody I speak to on that basis would agree. Even your artisan classes, your chippy, your joiner, the people who've got common sense for a living.
They can see it. Yeah. Boris Johnson got paid. I think, I can't remember the name of the agency. I think it was the Harvey Jameson agency, or Harvey something or the other agency in New York, based in New York. He got paid £2.6 million upfront for speeches he hadn't made but would make. There were upfront payments to book him for speeches, and that was in the latter part of 2022, early part of 2023. And I found it very, very odd. I understand booking a speaker, you might pay $5,000 to book a speaker, but that's a hell of a lot of $5,000 to get up to 2.6 million in advance payments. And I wondered, what the nature of those payments were, who they were from, and why it was that they would pay so much for Boris Johnson just to book him.
Brings you back, does it not, to the role of the press? You would think that the press would crawl all over that.
I've mentioned it in many interviews. People don't want to know. They don't want to discuss it.
Fascinating, isn't it?
He was still an MP for a while, so he had to enter the 2.6 million in his register of interests. But he only put the name of the broker that paid the fee, this Harvey Jameson agency or whatever they're called. I can't remember the exact name. He didn't put the names of the underlying entities who had booked him. And he stepped round the point on disclosure. Anyway, this is a very, very deep rabbit hole we're getting into. But I just remember at the time being alarmed that this man is making the case for Ukrainian war in a very, vociferous manner, getting everyone worked up about it. And he's getting these massive payments from an American agency. And we know it's the Americans' arms industry that benefits most from war. And so that my mind was, set down various it almost sounds like conspiracy theory, but I don't think it is. If someone's being paid lots of money to say things, it's perfectly plausible, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's conspiracy analysis. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So would I be right in saying also I think almost everybody's coming around to it now, apart from the Miliband's of this world. That net zero has been a disaster. It continues to be a disaster, and we simply cannot go on having the most expensive energy in the world.
No.
And that's got to stop. So, is that a given as far as your new party is concerned?
Oh, given, absolutely. We're not going to find our way back to any form of prosperity while net zero is in play. We have to abandon net zero. We have to reduce taxes on the fossil fuel companies that are currently paying 78% of their corporate, their profits in corporation tax. My chairman of the business that I run is an oil man, and he said, forget about all the restrictions that are foisted on oil companies as a result of net zero. They won't drill in the North Sea because of the tax rate. Why would they? They can go and drill off the coast of South America or off the coast of the UAE or wherever, close to zero taxation. Why would they come to the North Sea? And so we've got to pare that right back. We've got to get as much access to our own fossil fuels as we possibly can. And we've got to make, and the net zero agenda is not just in addition to the cost of the access of fuel, which it is massively, but it also requires us to insulate our homes to ridiculous levels, to change perfectly good gas boilers for heat exchangers at vast cost, to give up perfectly good cars that actually have pretty low carbon emissions because of the way cars have developed over the last few years, to buy really expensive electric cars with dubious secondhand value, and so on and so forth. And the cost burden on the United Kingdom from adhering to net zero or trying to adhere to net zero is vast. I can tell you this because I'm in commercial property. 80% of commercial property in the United Kingdom does not comply with the net zero requirements for 2030. So in 5 years' time, 80% of the property in the United Kingdom, commercial property, I don't know what, offices, retail, leisure, that kind of thing, will be incapable of being released or sold on the market because it won't comply unless there's massive capital expenditure on those properties. And of course, if you spend lots of money on property, then you need a much higher rent to justify having spent the money. So this is all very inflationary, very damaging to business, and particularly damaging to those areas in the UK that need to be leveled up. If you have a building that doesn't meet net zero targets in Sunderland, for example, the capex required to meet the net zero targets make the building unviable. So you just knock it down. In other words, you remove commerce from that region. And commerce all then gets concentrated in significant urban areas like London or Birmingham, maybe, but you denude the rest of the country of its commerce. So net zero has multiple effects. If the cost of energy is up, inflation is up, and it destroys businesses. It's terrible, terrible policy.
Finishing, because I'm conscious of your time, Ben, just finish on one sort of hot topic. And on the other questions, we come back another day as we go into closer to whatever form of elections are coming, and we can deal with that, play the bowling as it comes, as it were. Something that I've always been slightly bewildered by, and that is legacy media and, if you will, legacy party policies, total refusal to accept that mass immigration and illegal immigration is government policy. We keep referring to these imaginary gangs and so on and so forth, when we have both governments, the last were no better. You're offering to put people up in 4-star hotels, give them 3 meals a day and pocket money. This has been going on now for several years, not just with this government. And these fake crocodile tears about why it's happening when it's quite deliberately government policy. And we know Sunak thought he was going to be bringing in cheap labor, as it were, or he could control wage inflation by bringing lots of these people in. And this fake idea that eventually they'll have something to add to the economy when they come from a completely different culture. There's no room in this country now for unskilled labor of the indigenous population. Unskilled labor is not required. And as AI comes in, even some of the professional classes are going to be hit by it. So we know that it's government policy. We know that it's all quite deliberate. It's not an accident. And yet there's this pretense that what can we do? And there's international maritime law and there's the United Nations, when this is little short of an alien invasion, which can only be stopped by mobilizing the Royal Navy to do so. And I don't understand why anybody can't face up to this truth.
Well, I've been saying exactly what you've just said, Godfrey, for the last few years. I completely agree. You need a physical force to enforce your borders. It's how it's been done for centuries. You enforce your borders by defending them. And we claim that we wish to, we wish to protect the United Kingdom from threats in the Middle East. So we mobilize ships to go and bomb Houthis in Yemen, or we'll support the Israelis bombing Iran and so on. But yet our borders are completely unpoliced. So hundreds of thousands of single, fighting age men are coming into the country. And you just, this is not a proposition, but it's just imagine if all those men who've come across in the boats, hundreds of thousands of them, all decided to rise up against the United Kingdom at the same time. Let's just imagine that they did that. No force in the UK would be able to stand up to them, because there would be hundreds of thousands of them all over the UK, dispersed, and we wouldn't have the wherewithal to defend ourselves. The easiest point to protect civil society in this country is at the point of entry. Stop them before they get in. Digital ID, it's just a complete bloody red herring. How do you stop illegal migration? By policing those who are here legally. You still don't know who isn't here, it won't identify for you automatically who's here illegally. You have to have the happenstance of bumping into someone without ID and then having to apprehend them. But as you've just said, Godfrey, even if they didn't have ID, they'd be put up in a 4-star hotel, given money in their back pockets, free dental care, free healthcare. No, the whole system is broken. And this comes back to the first question you asked, if you don't mind me saying that. The architecture of the UK is broken. So before we can really tackle illegal migration and mass migration, we have to go back, repeal the Equalities Act, repeal the Human Rights Act, leave the ECHR, get rid of those political activist judges, make sure we've got judges who buy into the new system, and we absolutely enforce our borders. And those that do get through get detained, they get held under lock and key, and then they get deported at the earliest possible opportunity, using all possible means for their deportation, with or without deportation agreements with the countries from which they came. We need a much more robust approach to the protection of our country.
Thank you, Ben. That's I think we'll finish it there, because I think that's a very good note to finish it on. It's such a positive note, the doing thing, as we say. Yeah. That is the doing thing. Now, I know a lot of my subscribers will be agreeing with I know for a fact they're agreeing with a lot of this, especially having been mildly disappointed elsewhere where they have looked in other ways, to hear something so black and white, so crystal clear what needs to be done, and somebody who's prepared to do it, and that's really what we need now. Where would all my subscribers immediately find you if they wanted to give you support?
So I'd love them to join up, Godfrey. I'd love them to join Advance UK. And the way to do that is to go to www.advanceuk.org.uk, www.advanceuk.org.uk, and then click on the membership button and sign up. It's 10 quid until the end of the month, end of September, and then it goes to £20 because we've hit our self-imposed hurdle of 30,000 members. We'd kept the fee down at £10 in order to get there. We're now at just over 35,000 members. But join up ASAP.
Okay, and there'll be a link. On my web and my channel direct to that, so they've only got to press that one button. So super duper duper. Thank you very much for coming on. And I do have, as you know,
Thank you.
other stuff to talk about, which is very, very important that we talk about it too, but not necessarily at this stage. So perhaps I could get you to commit to coming on again, maybe in a few months' time, and cover what we couldn't cover today. And anybody who watching this, anybody who's enjoyed this little talk between Ben and myself, get in touch with me. And I'll answer anything I possibly can. And of course, I know Ben would like to hear from you as well. And if anything, so why didn't you ask him this or why didn't you ask him that? I jolly well will ask him this and that, but we don't have time in one go. So thank you again, Ben. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.